Let's talk about negativity in online communities.
My mom thinks he just got killed by a cat. They hauled the song away in a body bag. Eat a murder. Eat a burger.
Now, I've never really been a one fandom kind of person. I like to kind of take in a lot from a bunch of different fandoms across the internet, starting with like Neopets way back in like 1999, 2000, all the way up till now. Despite what my YouTube channel looks like, I really have been the kind of person that sits on the outskirts of a community rather than getting fully entrenched. That said, I've always been someone who posts on forums. I usually like to get involved, but anonymously, and meeting online, and a lot of times even meeting up in like video game lobbies would be too much for me. And when I say too much for me, I don't mean it's like a level of pressure I can't handle. It's more like I enjoy keeping my interests and things I like to myself and being able to kind of turn on and off my interests at will and step back from communities without feeling like I'm stepping away from people or neglecting relationships. With that said, though, I've been lucky enough to be at the very beginnings of a lot of different fandoms across the internet, and I've watched communities grow out of YouTubers, both who are huge now and who have completely fizzled out. But the thing that I'm always kind of bracing for, and the first thing that makes me usually step back from a community, is when it takes that turn into the negative. Now, I'm not going to sit back here and say that I haven't rolled around in the mud and made my fair share of stupid comments or needlessly criticizing something that online creators were doing. I've luckily never delved into hateful things or being just outright monstrous, but still, I've rolled around in the mud. I've been on the internet since the late 90s and early 2000s. I was upset when Ray left Achievement Hunter. I was really mad when Red Letter Media didn't like Rogue One. So I've been there, so please don't think that I'm talking down to people who get a little too invested into the things they like online. I'm also not talking about legitimate controversies. If you've watched my channel, you know I don't really talk about certain things around Rooster Teeth because they've been talked about to death. I have nothing more to add to the subjects, but there are some legitimate things that happen in every community that, you're allowed to get upset about, you're allowed to get angry about, and you're allowed to voice your discontent. We're not really talking about that. What we're talking about is when a community goes from being a very positive, very hype place about whatever the creator's doing, but then suddenly there's some sort of shift. People start to get mean. And of course, once something gets too popular, people just enjoy hating on it. We're talking about the period before that, right after things seem to be going so well. I have this number that I've put in the title of 10,000 people. I believe that 10,000 people active in a community is where the tide starts to shift. This has been a belief I've kind of kept to myself for a long time. I've always said before I started making YouTube content that I would love if I could just get 10,000 solidly active members in a community together, and I think we could keep things positive, and I could kind of serve as a content lighthouse for people. And I'll get more into this idea of a lighthouse later. What I'm going to do now is highlight 4 different communities that I think show a good progression of negativity within fandoms on the internet. So we're actually going to start with the podcast called Morning Somewhere. This is a podcast made by Bernie Burns, the creator of Rooster Teeth, and his wife, Ashley Burns. This has probably been my most listened to podcast of the last 2 years. At base, the podcast is a daily news show Monday through Friday where Ashley and Bernie talk about video game news, pop culture, the world, politics, all sorts of stuff in a really light manner to kind of start your morning. I usually listen to it on my commute. It's very light, inoffensive content, and it's also a nice vehicle to kind of get Rooster Teeth back up and running again while Bernie puts everything together for the relaunch at the end of the summer. They started the podcast back at the beginning of 2024, and they're pretty much in their infancy when you talk about an online community. Now, I know that's not really fair because Rooster Teeth was a property before that, but Bernie went dark for about 4 years, and this was something he started out of nowhere and is on the rise. And when I'm talking about communities, you have to keep in mind, I'm not talking about the average listener. I'm talking about people who are engaged in the content online, who go, they like, they comment, they talk to other fans of the content. Now, there are some creators out there that think the best kind of fan is one that doesn't really comment online. They watch the product, they consume it, and they buy merchandise, and they pretty much stay out of it. They don't engage with the creators, they don't engage with other fans, and they might recommend it to a friend or two. This does not seem to be the philosophy of Bernie, who started a community site partly so fans would be able to discuss things amongst themselves while they cranked out the show Red vs. Blue at the beginning of the 2000s. If you don't believe me, Bernie did a keynote at VidCon about a decade ago that was fantastic. He basically talked about this idea that we always talk about fandoms or communities or an audience in terms of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of views. He demonstrated the importance of an active, engaged, even small community and what it could do, and he did this in two ways. First, he showed a bunch of RWBY cosplayers, which RWBY is a show that was made by Monty Oum and Rooster Teeth. It's an anime, and when the first trailer was put out, they had a bunch of people cosplaying at the very next convention they went to. It was probably about 30 or 40 people cosplaying. Bernie puts a picture up of the 30 or 40 people cosplaying and says, on a line item, that looks like 30 or 40 DVDs sold. And that what that picture shows is that this is way more important than that small number. These people are going to be evangelists and go out and they're going to recruit new fans, bring more people into the community, and they're going to hype the thing that you're making. Second way he talked about an active community was by showing their Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign for their movie Laser Team. And he showed how just 20,000 donations ended up funding their entire feature film that they had been dreaming of making. When there are creators out there that would see 20,000 views maybe on a video of theirs and think there was something wrong with the video or that they needed to completely shift their focus to gain more attention. Now, the reason why all this is interesting is that from the beginning of the Morning Somewhere podcast, when the Morning Somewhere subreddit was introduced, Bernie talked about the idea of capping the number of people that would be allowed into the subreddit. Back when he first mentioned it, I think the two numbers he was throwing out were 10,000 and 20,000. And so when you join the subreddit, one of the flares you could actually get was first 10,000 members. Now, Bernie's talked about a bunch of different reasons over the last year and a half for this, partially because of the negativity that can turn around in the community. He's also talked about the worry of AI being introduced and not knowing who's a real person online and who isn't. Personally, I don't think it would be too much to speculate that he saw how the last few years of the Rooster Teeth subreddit turned extremely negative before the closing of the company. Again, we're not talking about controversies that people were upset about. We're talking about specifically what people were doing in this community that were extremely negative. And we'll get into that later, but we're talking about the Morning Somewhere podcast right now. As someone who's been very active on that subreddit, I've been able to kind of chart how things have been going the last year and a half. And largely, the community is extremely positive. It does seem to skew a little bit older, a lot of people who are actually into their careers. And honestly, within that first year, I think the most negative thing people would say about the subreddit was that it kind of seemed to exist to fact check Bernie and Ashley, even though it was kind of a lighthearted news podcast. And then something interesting happened. So they hit the 10,000 number, and so then Bernie made a new flare called the first 20,000. I'm not going to pretend that there can't be some heavy confirmation bias working against me here, but I do feel that there has been a clear and negative shift in the subreddit that a lot of the time seems to be coming from people with that first 20,000 flare, though it's not isolated to them. The crucial thing here is that they're so early on in this community that the community is still extremely positive. So when I say there's a shift, I mean I'm talking about a 5% to 10% shift in the negativity that I've seen in the comments. Now, I'm not going to point out specific comments or specific people, but I will talk about the last two big flare-ups in the community. One that's been on and off for a while, but really hit a peak a few weeks ago, is Bernie having an old friend of his, Scott, on the podcast. Scott has by far been the most frequent visitor. His episodes are usually the longest, and Scott is a pretty hardcore conspiracy theorist. We're talking the moon being a base for ancient humans. We're talking 9/11 truther stuff. We're talking anti-gravity technology being hidden from the public. And starting back when Bernie first released his first episode with Scott, the comments on that episode were 10 times what the comments are on every other episode. And every Scott episode, both on the Patreon and on the subreddit, seems to make the community explode. One portion of the community basically said that having Scott on the podcast is dangerous, and platforming that kind of rhetoric can be detrimental to the people who listen. Another portion of the community thinks that Scott's just entertaining and crazy and enjoy having him on. There's another portion that seems to enjoy just pointing out the conspiracies and the errors in the conspiracies and why they're wrong. I find myself in that portion. There's another portion that says people like me and the people like the first group are being way too hard on Scott and everyone needs to lay off of Scott and they actually enjoy Scott. And there's a final portion that agrees with a lot of the things that Scott says. Now, the sizes of these portions aren't exactly equal, and I'm not going to try to speculate as to what side has more people, but just going across these threads, and it's not the number of negative comments, it's how the comments are turning negative and kind of mean and spitting at each other. You would obviously expect as a community grows for there to be more negative comments. There's also going to be more positive comments. It's something more specific than that where you can actually see people getting hateful towards each other, and in some cases even the creators. The second flare-up that I'm going to talk about, I think, is a great example of how a small community will try to protect itself and really try to stay a positive place. To sum it up, one user posted experiences they were having in the LA protests recently. Another commenter on the subreddit started kind of fact-checking them, and they battled back and forth for way longer than you should ever argue with someone on Reddit. And then the original poster commented that he had just checked the arguer's account and he should have never wasted the energy. So it turned out when you looked at this guy who was arguing with the OP, he basically had an account that said that he was an account that used ChatGPT and AI to, I think his words were, to enhance arguments. Like enhance and streamline arguments, I think were maybe the exact words. But basically what he was doing was he was taking what this guy would say to him and he would put into ChatGPT and say, explain to this guy why he's wrong. So I'm on the subreddit a lot. I didn't see this part of the conversation. Bernie actually brought it up on the podcast at the end of an episode to kind of talk to the community and ask them a question. He basically said, how do we feel about this? We have someone who's openly admitting that they're using AI to argue. Is this something we should allow because he's being open and honest about it? Or is this something that we shouldn't allow because we want to know that there are real people that we're talking to? This audience definitely seems to be a little bit more tech savvy than most. I know I'm certainly not on the cutting edge of AI or understanding all of its implications, but I was interested to see which way the community went, and oh my goodness, it was a resounding absolutely not. We don't want that here. Don't allow that here. We never want that here. So the community within a few weeks went from, absolutely being at each other's throats about this Scott issue to all immediately uniting to kick out the AI that didn't belong. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not me advocating for gatekeeping. I do think it illustrates a community's ability to work together, protect itself, and I think it's what people are going to be moving towards, and this is going to get back to that lighthouse idea I'm going to talk about later. But now we're going to move on to a different community, a very small community that seems to be bred from hatred, and it's a community that's arose out of something called Red Letter Media. For those of you that don't know, Red Letter Media does a lot of movie reviews. They've been on YouTube for about 15 years. Most famously, they made the Plinkett reviews, which are the breakdowns of the prequel movies that are about as long as the prequels themselves, and just kind of delving into why they didn't like the prequels. They host a show called Best of the Worst, where they watch terrible movies and rank them. They're also very popular with people within the film industry. They've had guests like Jack Quaid on and Patton Oswalt. Their point of pride is that they don't do any ad reads, they don't do any product plugs, they just make all of their money from merch, Patreon, and just the regular AdSense money from YouTube. They currently have over 1.6 million subscribers and growing, and the content has remained pretty much the same for the last 15 years, but they do add shows every few years, and it's been a favorite of mine for a long, long time. It shares a lot of similarities with other communities where people have found controversies, they've done some digging. The company themselves has really not gotten into too many controversies. There have been a few big things that have happened that were many years ago, but the community has gotten pretty involved. It's got its problem children, but we're actually not talking about the 1.6 million YouTube subscribers, and we're not talking about the Red Letter Media subreddit. So I'm an on and off member of that subreddit, and one day, a few years ago, I was making a comment. I was probably arguing with somebody about something on the Red Letter Media subreddit, when all of a sudden I got an invitation to something called That Other RLM Sub. So I said, what's this? And to use the creator's words here, he says that it is a pitiful subreddit born purely from spite. Basically, it's a cesspool of hatred and misery, a bona fide shithole filled with posters with an ounce of insight, creativity, or intelligence. Some say this community is merely a troll sub, but occasionally, very rarely, some substantive posts may find their way here only to then be dogpiled on by retards from r/Red Letter Media, the insightful points being entirely lost on them. I hardly give a shit. Do you? Nope. Now, normally I'm not someone who enjoys just indulging in blatant hatred online, but I am fascinated by communities, so I kind of stuck around here to see what was going on with this one. That's where I found something absolutely hilarious and ironic that's going on in this subreddit. So the main poster in this subreddit has always been the guy who made it. His posts and comments, a lot of them have since been deleted, but I mean, they're racist, sexist. They say horrible things about the people from Red Letter Media, but he also seems to really love Red Letter Media, and he really likes to talk about Red Letter Media. He seems to be pining for this golden age of Red Letter Media that he doesn't think they have anymore, but he also can't really articulate why they don't have it anymore. Because as someone who's watched their content for 15 years, they're pretty much the exact same now as they were 15 years ago. But the hilarious thing that I've seen cropping up on this subreddit is a lot of positivity. Like they had a voice actor on one of their Best of the Worst episodes. Someone made a post talking about how the guy sucked. All the comments were saying how great the guy was and that they really enjoyed him and they hope they have him back. Someone else posted many months ago how they were just kind of losing it and how they were so upset at the content and they just wanted the old thing back and they were really upset. And everyone kind of got together and said, hey buddy, you shouldn't take this so seriously, but not even in a condescending way. Everyone was really positive and really nice and kind of trying to pull him out of whatever unfortunate episode he was going through. I'm not some sort of internet doctor, but I do find it really interesting that first we have a subreddit that's growing, it's popular, it's extremely positive, but you are seeing more angry and negative comments creeping in as that number crossed the 10,000 line. And then you have a subreddit like this that's small, 500-600 people, and they are supposed to be the meanest, nastiest people, and some of the posts in there are just horrible, but it seems to be populated by people who are actually pretty nice and are actually fighting to kind of hold positivity in the small community. And to be clear, this is in no way an endorsement of that subreddit. A lot of hateful talk goes on in there, and I would never say it's a positive place, but it is interesting to see almost the opposite thing happening in the Morning Somewhere subreddit. But now we're going to move on to our third subject, who is no stranger to negativity. We're going to talk a little bit about Taylor Swift. Now don't worry, this won't be too long, but it is something pretty interesting that you can see, like even on Reddit. I will say, I am a bit of a Taylor Swift fan. I've listened to all the albums. I've been to the Eras Tour. Not really involved in the communities online, but they are fascinating to go and look at. If you don't know, there are a ton of different subreddits for Taylor Swift. I'm going to show a few of them here. Don't worry about the more like sexually aggressive ones.
Also, there were some searches for girls with large thighs. What's up with that, pal?
But there's a lot of really interesting ones, and they all have their own dynamic that all lean mostly negative. And you might be thinking, but wait, one just says swiftly neutral. Yeah, but it's not really neutral. It started that way, but it then just started kind of to skew negative, and then that became a hub, as well as like the Travis and Taylor subreddit. They all started becoming hubs for the negativity. Now, it's interesting because each one kind of has their cap on negativity. So when a controversial subject comes up, or something's in the news, or Taylor Swift gets shown one too many times on the NFL Jumbotron, the hate will start in one of the subreddits and then rise to a certain level and then hit the cap for that subreddit. And the cap's always different. The cap could be just the amount of hate, or it could be the specific thing that they're wanting to hate. And of course with Taylor Swift, I mean, the main things are always going to be either her music, people not liking it, or, you know, the number of guys she's dated, which is, by the way, completely normal for someone who's in their mid-30s. This is the part where I'm going to get good engagement for the video with just all the comments disagreeing. All in all, it's kind of fascinating to watch each one deal with different pieces of drama. And I'm sure that a lot of the people across the subreddits are the same, but the usernames do differ enough to show you that there's like popular posters in each subreddit. Taylor Swift's a multi-billionaire. She can handle that kind of thing, but it is fascinating to see a hate on that sort of level and how the community spreads the negativity when the Taylor Swift sub itself locks out on negativity. We saw this kind of similar thing with the Rooster Teeth subreddit towards the end of the company, where they pretty much blocked out anything negative about Rooster Teeth. Now, a lot of people were really upset by that, but there was so much negativity in the same posts going over and over again. I kind of see where they were coming from. Now, of course, the rational counter argument to that would be something like, hey, well, there's not a lot of posts going on in this subreddit, so I might as well post something. And yeah, I guess, but I think at the time people were more concerned with the employees who'd be losing their jobs, and it didn't really feel like the time to, you know, poke at them and tell them all the things that they did wrong and how if you ran Rooster Teeth, you would have done a better job. To wrap things up, let's talk about the negativity in my favorite community, which is my community. So my 10,000 person rule holds pretty true in most of the videos. You'll go to my normal shorts or videos that don't have that many views, and the comments are all some of the nicest comments I have seen. One guy even posted on the Morning Somewhere subreddit about my channel, and he made such a nice post. I actually woke up and saw it and was so conflicted because I was like, anybody who would read this post is gonna think it's me. Thankfully, he lived in like some other city. You can tell from his other posts. But some of the comments I get on Reddit, I get on here, I get on TikTok, they're so incredibly nice, and I couldn't be happier about it. But in my bigger videos, the comments get pretty bad. I don't really like the idea of filtering comments or deleting them. I feel like even if someone's gonna say something negative, I'd rather them just get it out. I haven't taken that position towards like hateful stuff, so I have deleted some comments that are just outright hateful. I will say that I have noticed that people want to talk about Rooster Teeth, they want to talk about Achievement Hunter, but they really want to talk about their Rooster Teeth, their Achievement Hunter. And, you know, people dropped off at different times. I've talked in different videos where I would come on and off. I really like being that for people. So if someone wants to say they stopped watching Achievement Hunter when Ray left, or it didn't feel like 6 guys in a room anymore after like 2018, I don't have too much of a problem with that because, you know, they're getting it out. There's a lot of people out there with a lot of different opinions. I'm not really here to silence that. I really want to allow people to feel like they're in a good space where they can talk about their love for Rooster Teeth, their love for Achievement Hunter, their love for Ruby. But also at the same time, I can't abide the hateful stuff. So I was actually at Homebrew and I was riding to a little merch hunt that we were doing. And I hadn't said this on any of my videos yet, but I kind of mentioned that for the Rooster Teeth merch hunt giveaways, if you're not familiar, I give away Rooster Teeth merch every week. And I try to usually go to like a thrift store or something around Austin and find some sort of merch to give away. If I don't, I just give something away from my personal collection. At first, I was just giving it away randomly. Then one person who I was about to announce as the winner, on a whim, I just checked their other comments on my channel. And they said something absolutely horrendous about a former Achievement Hunter employee. Regardless of whether you're a fan of every Achievement Hunter, there's some stuff you just don't say. I mean, sexist stuff, racist stuff. I mean, I have a pretty tolerant bar, like I said, but when we start broaching into just straight up hateful content, this isn't the place for it. It's never been the place for it. So I filter that stuff. And quite honestly, if you've left a really awful comment about somebody on one of my videos and I pick you to win something from the merch giveaways, I'm not going to give it to you. That's me directly either ignoring the awful stuff that you said, or I think a lot of people could make the argument that I'm supporting it by letting you win anyway. And that's actually the funny thing about my videos. Most of the hate or negativity isn't really directed at me. It is directed at everyone at Rooster Teeth or everyone at Achievement Hunter. And rarely do they come after me. Most of the time, it's been the same few comments on the Achievement Hunter video and the Funhouse video, the Where Are They Now? Even though I say only talking about people who are still publicly doing something, I'm not going to talk about anything negative that was going on at the time. I'm only talking about what they're doing now if they're doing something publicly. But a lot of people view that as, for some reason, a history video or a complete unabridged telling of the story of Rooster Teeth or Achievement Hunter, and it's clearly not that, but people really get riled up. That's most of the comments that are negative towards me are basically saying that I'm ignoring history or how could I not mention someone. And there are cases where I've left some people out. Don't worry, I have part 2s coming out that are going to address the people that I did miss. You know, it was pretty crazy. A lot of people just want me to mention like Ryan Haywood. They try to play dumb and they're like, wait, what happened to Ryan? I hope Ryan's doing good. How's he doing? Go off, I guess. Everyone kind of sees what you're doing, but whatever. They're not saying anything awful. They're just, I guess, trying to get a reaction. Who knows? Maybe they don't know. But again, not making any videos on that kind of stuff. I think it's just cheap views at this point. I did get one comment that I think it was the first negative comment I got, and it was a guy saying that I sounded like Queso, the streamer. And boy, I don't see it or hear it, but I definitely acknowledged it as an insult. Which, no disrespect to the Queso guy, seems like a cool guy. But, sometimes you can just tell when someone's coming for you. But it was kind of fun because it was the first time someone was outwardly negative towards me. And it's funny because being on the internet for so long, you always say, don't read the comments, don't worry about the comments. People said so many nice things over the last few months and send me private messages that are just really moving. But you forget all of that the moment you see one negative comment, especially one that comes after you specifically. So, yeah, it's definitely giving me perspective. I know I left negative comments in the past on, all sorts of videos, especially when I was late teens, early college, just being an idiot. And a lot of stuff I really wish I'd take back now. Only other thing I'll mention is the fun things that get mentioned in a lot of my comments. And this is going to be mostly Rooster Teeth related, obviously, but people just being completely wrong about Rooster Teeth stuff. A lot of people thinking that, for example, Bernie from Rooster Teeth is secretly a huge Trump supporter, and that it's clear, and if you've watched the content over the years, that, well, his argument wasn't that it was secret. His argument was that's the whole reason why he left Rooster Teeth, was because he was such a Trump supporter and he didn't like the political direction of the company, which I found that pretty crazy. A lot of people say that they never mentioned politics before like 2020, which that's an insane take. As someone who's consumed a lot of Rooster Teeth content, they were talking about politics like the first few episodes of the Drunk Tank. I mean, they were posting stuff on their journals. I mean, we can't go through all of it. There's too much. But to say they didn't start talking about politics till 2020 either means that you started watching Rooster Teeth in 2020, or you just weren't really paying attention to politics before 2020. Maybe you weren't old enough. That's just, that's just not true. But I really appreciate you guys letting me kind of go on this new tangent, coming up with some new video ideas, branching out a little bit, learning how to edit, put videos together. Everyone's been so nice, so kind. I really can't get over how nice so many of you have been. But yeah, thanks for letting me yap to you a little bit about negativity in communities. But it's been fun hanging out with you guys again, and it was fun meeting so many of you at RTX. Oh, Jesus, RTX. It was fun meeting a bunch of you at Homebrew. People were so nice. I got to hear that people came from so far because they had watched the Homebrew video, and they were there having a great time, and it was so awesome to meet everyone. I got a little overwhelmed. I had to spend kind of the last day. I left the live show a little early to go back to the hotel and kind of decompress from the weekend. But it was such a great event. Keep an eye out for the next one. I know a bunch of people in the comments were saying that they're going to go to the one next year because they didn't have enough notice. The one next year, can't even imagine how much crazier it's going to be. And maybe we'll even get Rooster Teeth involved because it'll be back, and it'll have been back for about a year at that point. So I'd love to see Bernie and them get involved. Oh, and a quick editor's note, because I am my own editor. The Morning Somewhere subreddit, Bernie has put in the application for it to go private. So it may already be private by the time this video comes out, but if it's not, go join it before it gets shut down, because you won't really be able to use it or view it if you aren't in it right now. So I would go take advantage of that. It's a great community. People there are awesome. Love that place. One of my favorite subreddits. So try to get in if you still can. But other than that, again, thank you so much. Can't wait for the next one. Bye-bye. Okay, wait, just one more thing, I promise. I was about to post the video, but then I realized I completely didn't go into the whole lighthouse idea for content. I actually think that'll be way better as its own video. So if you're waiting, if you're like, what is he talking about with the lighthouse stuff? Don't worry, it's coming. It's going to be its own video. Okay, thanks everybody.